Hello, Mr. Gilvanis here again, and bringing you Britain, Health and the People. So let's just crack right on with what you need to know about this part 2 exam of your History GCSE. So first of all, health and the people. The whole idea of health is basically broken down by the course into meaning the understanding of the cause of disease, how that disease is then treated, and then public health, meaning sort of what's going on for everyone, and surgery. Now, the whole point of this is how does health, meaning understanding of cause, treatment, public health, surgery, progress over time? Time being medieval, Renaissance, 19th century, and modern. Now, the different factors that progress health are religion, government, luck or chance, science and technology, communication, individuals, and war. And basically, the language you want to use is identify which theme they're talking about. If it just says medicine, then it's any of them, and which factor they're referring to. Now, the other language to consider is the language of each period of time. So we know that in the medieval period, progress of medicine was at a standstill, whereas in the Renaissance, they were beginning to challenge everything and it became the beginning of change. 19th century, there's a revolution in the progress of medicine because of germ theory. And in the modern, there's this race to learn to understand. So let's crack on with medieval. And of course, was there any progress? No, not really. It's at a standstill. So let's break it down into the themes. What exactly did people believe were the causes of disease? Well, first of all, they believed if you are sick, it's caused by God. So essentially, if God is punishing you, you have committed a sin and therefore are being punished. The other reason for cause, so other understanding was Galen's four humors, which basically, if one of your humors were out of balance, then you needed to restore it. Astrology was a factor, blaming minorities, and miasma, which is that bad smell. Now, of course, if that's that understanding, how did they then treat? Well, ultimately, if you've sinned and are sick, you should pray, repent, and basically beg forgiveness. If your humors are out of balance, you need to balance them again. So if you're cold, add heat. If you're too hot, add cold. That sort of thing. The idea being essentially to restore those four humors. Astrology, I have no idea, but basically just follow the planets. And then, well, with minorities, if you're blaming them for disease, and traditionally people used to just persecute slash murder them. And for miasma, well, if it smells bad, either get rid of it or cover up cover up that bad smell, such as putting nice smelling things near or around you, or indeed just, anything that just gets rid of it. Then, what was going on with public health? Well, the simple truth is not much. The government did very little. It was ad hoc. There was no national attitude to public health. So, for instance, my go-to example is in York, the king built a bunch of toilets for his army. He was aware of the need for it, but it was ad hoc. Different councils and local towns made rules such as tanners and dye makers and things like that. They all had to do it, stop throwing their waste into the water, or butchers had to stop leaving the entrails of animals, the cut up bits basically in the streets, things like that. But again, ad hoc. The other thing about public health was it was not great. Why? Because often at times the water pipes and things were built from wood, which would rot and then seep into the drinking water, which would cause cholera, or are made of lead, which caused lead poisoning, and basically you go mad. Now, some things that they did have, for instance, were cesspits, which basically just a big hole in the ground for poo, and they would be these gong farmers who would come along and collect it and then take it out to the farms and things. So there was something there, but again, ad hoc. There were also 700 odd hospitals in the medieval time, but most of them were very much of the attitude of care, not cure, funded by the church, and sometimes you would only have 12 patients to reflect the 12 disciples. However, in the public health for medieval times, there were some very good areas to be, which is like a monastery. Why? Because number one, they had money, they were isolated, they believed in diet, they believed in hygiene, or this, cleanliness next to godliness. So essentially, that's where rich people went. But for the vast majority, it wasn't great. Regarding surgery now, well, ultimately, they didn't really know much because, there was no painkillers. Well, there were, but essentially they weren't any good. And everything was done on the battlefield, which basically meant get rid of whatever injury it was through amputation and then cauterize, which of course is heating up irons or something like that, pressing it to the skin so it seals. This is all very unpleasant. However, there were some basic surgeries performed, such as, for instance, teeth pulling or bloodletting, which were performed by barber surgeons. Some of the more complex surgeries that did occur, but of course not for everyone, was things like trepanning, which the famous example was the Black Prince who survived trepanning. Okay, so here we see a whole bunch of sources. Basically, what do we see? On the top left, we see a bunch of monks holding jars of urine, which, let's not forget, was a means of understanding if someone was sick. It was identified not so much as what caused the sickness, but a symptom of sickness. The darker your pee, the more chance your kidneys aren't working. The lighter it is, the better they are working. In the top and the middle there, you've got classic bloodletting. Top right, 12 patients, hospital. Bottom left, surgery, trepanning. Bottom middle, it's all about this idea they did surgery on the battlefield. And bottom right, it's the mandrake herb, mandrake root, which essentially is a bit of pain relief. How do you answer this question? How useful is this source to a historian studying question in the medieval period? Number one, what is it you see? You say, this is what I see, and you just add your own knowledge. For instance, the trepanning one, it shows us that they did have some forms of surgery back then, such as trepanning evidence with the Black Prince. The other thing you would say is, look, it's clearly being shared, this, that, and the other. It shows that it was commonplace. And finally, you'd add your bit of knowledge, basically saying, but it wasn't perfect. It was all they had, not much medicine, this, that, and the other. Pain relief, sorry. Okay, so here's another example of an exam question. It's the 16 marker, which we always recommend you start with. Has religion been the main factor in the development of medicine in Britain since medieval times? Well, number one, start with what themes, what factors. They've given you the factor of religion, so you've got to talk about it. Then you need to add two more factors. So think about religion. How is it done for cause, treatment, public health, and surgery? There's a model answer I've given. Notice the language I'm using. It was important in medieval Britain because it provided an understanding of the cause of disease through belief that God was the cause of sickness. This meant that treatment, public health, notice I'm going back to the core language of a unit, was restricted to a care not cure approach in the 700 hospitals, funded by the church, factor don't forget, but some had only 12 patients. The church promoted Galen's work. All of this is evidence, and for humors as a means of both understanding the cause of disease. Notice again the language of the course, because of humors being out of balance and how to treat it as such as bloodletting. However, the church, and this is my point, I'm answering the question now, the church didn't develop, answering the question, and progress medicine, instead kept it at a standstill. Remember what I said about each period of time having a key word, refusing to believe that there was anything beyond care not cure in Galen's work. Therefore, religion, answering the question, was not the main factor in development of medicine in Britain since medieval times. Okay, here's another exam question. Explain the significance. Now, the word significance is an important one in history because they want you to explain why something is important. That's all significance means. Now, in this unit, this course, significance basically is, was it new? And if it was new, therefore it's the first time it's done it. So compare it to what was before. Did it save lives? Have you got some numbers? Did it improve health? It might not save a life, but it might actually improve someone's health, i.e. plastic surgery. Or did it in fact just create a foundational knowledge that others then use later to do something else? But again, remember, use the language of the course. This one is asking about Galen's four humors. Is that surgery? Sort of. Public health? Sort of. Treatment? Sort of. Cause? Sort of. I say sort of. Cause and treatment are the key big ones here. So the first thing I would say is, well, it didn't really save lives. It didn't really improve health, but it was something new at the time for medieval, i.e. that it showed them a means of understanding the cause of disease. And in particular, I'd then explain all about the four humors, the balance, understanding it, and the treatment. I'd mix that in with surgery for the second paragraph to focus on how barber surgeons, bloodletting, and things like that. I would make the point with the significance of Galen's Four Humours is that it was then also by the church controlling it and saying essentially, this is everything you need to know. Okay. Another exam question here with similar question. It's only 8 marks, it's 2 field paragraphs. How's the Black Death and Great Plague similar? Again, you need to be talking about the themes. What is it? Surgery? Well, not in this case. Public health? Definitely. Cause and treatment? Definitely. So I would basically break it down to cause and treatment as one paragraph and public health as a second. One way in which they're similar was their understanding of the cause of disease and treatment. For example, both medieval and Renaissance times, people believed that the cause of disease was sin. It was minorities. It was astrology. It was miasma. And then basically say they were similar this way because essentially they didn't know about germ theory and therefore were constantly looking to causes and treatment such as quarantine. I'm trying to think out loud. All the extremes solutions they used, such as when religion didn't work, praying to God and things, and they went to chickens on buboes and bathing in dog's blood and all that sort of stuff. The second one, I'd say, there was no national policy. There were no hospitals. Yes, the 700, but care not cure. And essentially, I'd be saying, yes, some rich people got to the monasteries in isolation, but the vast majority of people were stuck. There was no effective quarantine in the Black Death, somewhat in the Great Plague. The bodies weren't buried properly, all of that stuff. I'd basically be comparing it in the second one, focusing on the language of public health. Then we move into the Renaissance period. Now, again, the key language here for any answer includes the words beginning of change. Now, the image in the background will have that provenance, that description. What you see there is actually the printing press. That's kind of how it originally would have looked. So that's something to keep in mind, potentially of any source. How is it useful? But basically, what do they think caused disease? All the same things: religion, four humours, astrology, minorities, miasma, and the new one, a scientific method, which basically actually means they didn't know, but they were wanting to learn and to experiment. Ditto in treatment. So all the same things, but they wanted to experiment. It doesn't actually mean they found the cause, it didn't mean they found the right treatment, but they were keen to use the scientific method, which remember is to have a hypothesis, to an idea, to try it, to experiment, to record, and then most importantly for the Renaissance and scientific method, to publish, to share that knowledge. Don't forget, you don't do it once, you do it several times, just like in any science lesson, but that's the key thing here. Now, public health doesn't really change. There's some more hospitals, a bit more funding by patrons. You're starting to get a few more specialized hospitals like Middlesex for children and Bedlam for people who are basically mentally unwell. And you're starting to see more people being treated, some more rich and poor. Surgery, again, doesn't really change, except there is experimentation. Key guy there being Pare. There is development, but again, it is the beginning of change. So what sort of sources could come up? You've got there top left, the plague mask, which is all about miasma, showing that they still believe it. Again, that's why it's useful from what you see, what you can link to, i.e. the cause of disease and how to treat it. Then you have Harvey and his veins and the blood circulation. Top right, you no longer have wise women and barber surgeons. You still do, sorry, but you're also starting to see apothecaries starting to grow, which is all the herbs and things. Bottom left, you've got Pare's surgery, plastic surgery, false limbs. You got Vesalius and his fabric of the human body, and you got Harvey's book, which is all about circulation again, and anatomy basically. And of course, they're starting to do autopsies in public, which were previously considered sinful. So they're learning, wanting to learn. Here's an example of a 16 marker focusing on communication, which is absolutely essential for Renaissance. Essentially, communication is the key factor because it gave a foundation of knowledge. That's why I'm sort of linking to that significance part, and it challenged the church and Galen. For example, the printing press was significant because it allowed the individuals of the Renaissance, such as Vesalius and Hunter, who were able to use the scientific method to challenge Galen's work, such as how, and this is where I'm throwing in the evidence, such as how many breastbones we have and where blood is produced. Importantly, that information back to communication is shared and built upon by others and was a beginning, notice the language again, of change in the Renaissance. That was only possible because question factor communication. Without it, the church would still control communication and the foundation of knowledge of medicine in Britain. This foundation of knowledge spread through communication, continuing to the 19th. This is where I'm basically growing out of the Renaissance into the 19th century, sharing germ theory with Pasteur, germ theory and Fleming with his research on penicillin. Only through communication has medicine been able to develop. So there's a clear answer to the question, if this was my most important. Now, I've just done a little bit different here with this one, where basically I've just said a few ideas of why these individuals are significant. Ultimately, what's the language? Vesalius, it was new. He challenged Galen. All that bit about the breastbones of apes that Galen used versus us having two. He also created a foundation of knowledge for anatomy, and he shared his book, Communication, Fabric of the Human Body. And essentially it's the same answer, which is it meant others didn't have to do what he did. They could learn from what he did and already have key language, foundation of knowledge. Pare, same thing, new, experiment, rose oil, all of that, instead of amputation, cauterization. He also went and wrote a book, everyone in the Renaissance did, plastic surgery, ligatures. Was he really successful? No, and you can say why not. They still didn't know about germs, they still didn't know about pain relief particularly, therefore they were limited, but ultimately you're talking about the positives. Harvey didn't do much other than write the book and basically say Galen was wrong, new. Blood isn't coming out of the liver, it's from the heart being pumped around. And this allows the future blood transfusions and things like that, which allows surgery to happen. Again, use that language and better treatment for people. Hunter, he's a trickier one to use, but essentially he's the perfect, and as all of them are, perfect examples of a scientific method challenging Galen, experimented on everything, including himself, trying to cure syphilis and ended up giving himself it. He collected evidence. He's all about evidence, lots of books. But he also created a foundation of knowledge again by teaching others, including Jenner, and wanted to set up this College of Surgeons. So he's really pushing College of Surgeons, public health, and surgery, of course. Okay, the similar question. Basically, how are they similar? Not dissimilar, not how are they different. You can say this is what's similar. And again, is it the cause of disease? Is it treatment? Is it public health, surgery? Well, it's talking about hospitals, so basically you're going to go public health. And what you want to say is, ultimately, it's still not quite there. It's not government backed. It's still very much controlled by the church or patrons. It's not everywhere. It's limited still. And you just want to talk about how, therefore, they're not really doing too much, but it is something at the very least. Their understanding of treatment, their understanding of cause of disease, their understanding, and the national point is still ad hoc. Not everyone gets it. Classic image of Jenner. Don't forget Jenner's another classic one. He rarely comes up in the exam, but maybe this is the year where basically he's a perfect one for 16 marker, by the way. He didn't fully understand it, but he tried it, which is he gave cowpox to people to vaccinate them. So you give them a little bit of something which you can survive cowpox so you don't get smallpox, which kills you. And at the time, they didn't understand it. He couldn't really explain it. He learned from this new idea of germ theory, which is just beginning to catch hold. And essentially, people are scared. It's a cartoon, it's public, so it shows you public reaction, which is essentially to not trust Jenner's work. You could talk about the £10,000, but ultimately, this is all about Jenner. You first paragraph tell everything you know about him. Second paragraph, it's really about the fact that, look, it's public. They're mocking it. They basically do not understand still germ theory and thus link it to cause of disease and treatment. We then move into the 19th century, which is a revolution for the progress of medicine. Why? Because of Galen. It's all about, sorry, not Galen, it's all about Pasteur. He's the one who comes up with the theory and it basically says germs are what causes disease. So what is their thinking about this time? That actually diseases are caused by spontaneous generation, literally they just come out of nothing. They come about from contagion, i.e. If it's dirty, it's going to cause disease, and germ theory. Now remember, it's a revolution. It doesn't really win everyone over till about the end of the 19th century, so there's still a lot of disagreement going on. But treatments, well, ultimately you can't do anything about anything spontaneous. You've got everyone experimenting and racing to find out how to do it, led by Koch, who's basically the father of bacteria. He basically says, look, this is how you do it. You take pictures of it, you can see it under the microscope, you can use dye to identify different germs, and use the seaweed on a petri dish to basically get the germ to grow faster, which means you can try different things on it. And Koch is the guy who basically comes up with treatments for different germs such as TB, anthrax, and rabies. Don't forget, how does he even know about it? Because Pasteur, like the Renaissance guys, wrote it down and shared it. Now, public health wise, still not much is really happening here. However, the big one is it's still ad hoc, but Bazalgette, they invest all that money into London sewers first time, millions and billions, and essentially they clean it up. It was filthy. They did it because it was basically so smelly and it made Parliament stink out. But remember, it's not because they thought that rivers should be clean. It was an ad hoc thing for London. Hospitals, however, are starting to improve, such as specialised ones, again, more patrons, there's rich and poor being treated. However, because of urbanisation, it is a horrible time to be living in a city with extremely bad conditions. So public health is actually getting worse. An example of this period of time is, of course, cholera spreading constantly. Why? The leaky pipes into drinking wells. John Snow, of course, used a scientific method to figure out which well was causing the problem, took the handle off to save everyone. But he didn't understand it still. This is why it's a revolution, but it's not quite there yet. Surgery, however, same sort of thing. Lots of new ideas, couldn't fully explain it, and that List is the perfect one for that. He's trying carbolic acid. He's basically like, look, the mortality rate is coming down, people are not dying as quickly. Scientific method again, where he tried on a kid who broke his leg. What the heck, well, might as well give it a go. Turns out he was right, and he just keeps doing it. But some other surgeons don't like it, they don't see the point. Lister, of course, still wearing his own clothes, and it's just like, you don't fully get it, therefore you can't fully justify it. Therefore, it's a revolution in that you're trying, progressing it, but not quite there yet. Painkillers as well, they're allowing longer, more complex operations, which means there's a greater foundation of knowledge for surgery, using such as nitrous oxide, ether, and chloroform, each one being experimented with. However, again, it's still not quite there because Greener used chloroform to have an ingrown toenail removed, ends up dying because you need to be sure each person has a different tolerance to chloroform by weight and metabolism, all different things. So basically, she died. Here's an example of what it would look like in the 16 marker again. Individuals, key in the development since the Renaissance. By using scientific method, example, they push the boundaries in the understanding of cause of disease, it means with which to treat it. Of course, this was just the beginning of change, and it wasn't until the germ theory was discovered so Pasteur could that it was really a revolution in the development of medicine. So I'm progressing it through the periods now. Pasteur's discovery was built on by so many, including Koch, who invented bacteriology, which really allowed the treatment of germs to happen, such as with TB, anthrax, and rabies. These individuals who discovered the cause and created means to treat really developed answering the question, medicine in Britain. Even in the modern period, we've seen it as key individuals such as Fleming and those who discovered vaccine for COVID that really developed medicine in Britain. So again, constantly going back and forth, back and forth. Okay, a couple of sources here. Why are they useful? You see there the laughing gas being used, which essentially tells you about painkillers for surgery. Again, they're experimenting something new, so that's really important. Really focus on that in your first paragraph. What you see, the provenance would be there, i.e., it's a cartoon, so it's public knowledge, everyone's trying it. And the second one is basically greener, chloroform, chair, big toenail, dead. So that second paragraph would all be about the limitations of it. This one, it's all about the Board of Health, 19th century, just starting off, which is basically showing you got these different things happening from government, but it's not really working quite right. There's still lots of problems. You can see it with starvation, so it'd all be that ad hoc part, the starting of it, but it's still not quite there. And then the water handle pump, which is all about, of course, cholera, public health, ad hoc. Didn't really understand it. Germ theory only just beginning. Spontaneous generation, anti-contagious, all of that stuff. And effectively add in a little Jon Snow if you want. This one is just a quick reminder. Don't forget there's still what's called quacks going around in the 19th century. People selling treatments for anything, cure-alls. In other words, you buy this and it will cure that, this magical oil. So people are going around and claiming all kinds of things. And finally, there is the government paying for the River Thames to be cleaned up by Bazalgette. We move into modern, a bit spelt wrong, but essentially with modern, it's all about the government. Everything about modern is all about the government. And in particular, World War II, where they say, look, actually, we've got some real problems of people having want. They don't know enough, ignorance. They're sick, diseased, they're living in poverty, squalor, and they're idle. They've got nothing to do. So we need to fix all that, which of course leads to the NHS. But what's the major differences with understanding of cause? Well, think about it. You've got germ theory going on now. It's fully accepted. And now you actually start to go, ooh, what about these germs that can't be cured? Basically, that's Fleming. This then progresses all the way to us realizing DNA is actually in genetics as part of it. So it's new understanding of what it is and how to cure. Treatment, basically, it's just an absolute race to find a treatment to every disease out there. But what really kickstarts treatment is things through war, i.e., the greater use of things like X-rays, blood transfusions, which of course is similar to surgery. But in particular for treatment, it's about the government, it's about the NHS treating everyone. It's now national. Public health, exactly the same thing. First of all, it's the Boer War, and we're like, oh no, we're not winning this so easily. What's going on? Well, the answer is basically we are unhealthy, and the government panics and is like, if we don't have a healthy people, we're not going to win a war, we're going to fall behind economically. So they ask Booth and Rowntree to find out what's going on. They do a report and basically say it's not poor people's fault, it's the situation. They introduce things like free school meal acts, public health acts, stuff like that, with the intention essentially of making us all healthier. But before it really gets going, you have the World War II, and essentially people are like, yeah, we demand better health. That's where Beveridge, Attlee, the Five Giants, all of the squalor, all of that, and they basically say we need to spend money on this nationally, and the NHS is born after World War II. Surgery, already mentioned really, but there's been loads and loads of modern things. You just got to know your personal choice of examples really. My go-to is keyhole surgery, avoiding open heart surgery, which means of course there's less intrusion into the body, faster recovery times, less chance of infection, and it's basically less impactful on the body and the heart. Here's an example on government. I'll let you read through that. Feel free to pause it now, mostly because I'm losing my voice. Notice how I try to really answer the question from a modern point of view, and notice how in my argument here, as if they're all connected, really hits home with my reason is that it's impacting everyone now. It's national. And say pause if you want to. Here's a couple of examples. One thing to remember is essentially what did the NHS do? It caught people out last year. It forces all doctors to work for the government, which means they can't charge whatever the hell they want anymore. They have to take a government paycheck. And that, of course, is not good for all those private doctors making tons of money. Penicillin, ultimately linked to war, government funded. Why? To win a war. And really, that's it. You've got to know your stuff. But here's the thing. I hope you've noticed I've constantly returned to this language, i.e. cause of disease, treatment of disease, public health, surgery, religion. These are the factors that progress those four themes. And at the bottom there, the language of each period of time. Best of luck.